I'm Richard Dolan. I've been writing about UFOs for quite a long time. I've got a couple of websites that deal with it. Richard Dolan Press, where I have a lot of the books that I've published and by myself and other authors, as well as Richard Dolan Members, which is a very active site where I have putting up a lot of content all the time. I'm very interested now in spring of 2018, where we are, in some of the developments of the UFO subject. Particularly the issues of, let's call it, the whole disclosure movement, if that's what we can call it, and a lot of elements relating to media portrayal of that. So I guess specifically what I'm looking at right now is, on the one hand, a long history of mainstream establishment media debunking of UFOs. And this goes right through from the 1940s right on through to the present day, in which, led by the New York Times, led by the Washington Post, and then in more recent eras, CNN and the other mainstream, have typically taken a debunking role toward the UFO subject. And then seemingly contrasting it with some of the recent treatment over the past 6 months or so, especially since December 2017, when the New York Times published a couple of articles on UFOs, and people thought, oh my goodness, they're changing their entire perspective. Why are they promoting UFOs when in the past they used to debunk it? So I want to talk a little bit about this. It's really not such a contradiction after all. So one of the things that people have to understand about the media, particularly the establishment media, is that it's not your friend. Mainstream media is not your friend. It will never be your friend. Mainstream media lies, mainstream media spins, mainstream media omits, it censors information. The mainstream media is owned by a tiny number of corporations that have their own agenda. The mainstream media has cooperated with the U.S. intelligence community for many, many years. The mainstream media even makes us sick, like literally makes us sick. There have been studies that have indicated this. And, so all of these things should make us wonder what is going on with our mainstream media. Well, one thing people have to understand is a program that we now know all about, known as Operation Mockingbird. And it's my opinion that every citizen in the world, and especially every American citizen, really needs to know what Mockingbird was. All right. So Mockingbird was a CIA organized media control program during what was known as the Cold War, the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. In particular, it was outed in the 70s. And what it involved was the CIA having hundreds of American journalists on their payroll. And just stop and ask yourself what that means, what that meant, and how much control you might be able to have over the news, over the media, if you had control or influence with 400 of the top journalists in your society. You could have a lot of power. And one of the things that they did was create fake news, literally fake stories. Primarily, they would create them internationally when they wanted to do regime change, like in Iran in 1953, or Guatemala in 1954, or Cuba in 1961, and elsewhere, where they would create fake stories abroad, and those stories would then filter back dutifully by UPI and Associated Press back to the United States to work up the public and justify regime change. It's an old story. This is not a new thing that the United States does. So anyway, this is part of what Mockingbird was doing back then. So then Mockingbird was outed. It was revealed in the 70s, and the CIA said, well, no, we don't do anything like that anymore. We don't have paid relationships with journalists for the purposes of influencing media. Yeah, they're very, very specific and legalistic when you hear them give these denials, by the way. But in fact, Mockingbird does exist. It's deeper, it's more profound, it's more powerful than ever before. And it doesn't just involve the CIA. It involves the Pentagon, which spends billions of dollars every year managing its own image worldwide, and that includes media relationships. The CIA and the Pentagon, there's deep, deep relationships going on there. So that's one thing people have to understand, all right? Your media is controlled. Your establishment media is deeply controlled. There is an agenda there in everything that comes out of CNN or any of the other major mainstream established sources. There is deep control going on there. And part of that control has affected the UFO subject. So over all of these years, and we know this, by the way, this is not a matter of speculation. So we know there was an infamous panel in the 1950s known as the Robertson Panel in January 1953, where the CIA convened a panel of scientists to discuss UFOs. And one of their primary conclusions in 1953 was, we will kind of put this subject to sleep as far as the public is concerned, and we're going to work with major media in the process of doing that. This was no big deal for them to work with the media. So the UFO subject has been handled in this matter. And the reason is that the UFO subject is of prime importance to national security. And all you have to do is read a few of the declassified documents that we have access to through Freedom of Information that prove, they don't hint, they prove that unknown objects of incredible capabilities have been evading our interceptors for quite some time, and they are mysterious, and they are exhibiting grave levels of concern. So the UFO subject is important. The UFO subject is part of the media's collaboration with the national security community. And for all of these years, the mainstream media has worked very, very dedicatedly to keeping the UFO subject on the margins, on the fringe, and they've succeeded. Now, a couple of things have happened over the last generation that have changed things up a little bit. One is we've developed this internet, the web, this interconnectivity that was not conceivable 25 plus years ago. No one could imagine this. So we have now a genuine, viable alternative media. This could not have happened prior to 1990 or even prior to like 2000, really. But it's here now. And that's a threat to the system. And what that has meant is that over the last 20 years or so, the establishment has had its own counteroffensive. And the latest iteration of that is deeming alternative news to be so-called fake news. And you hear this all the time. So this is the latest offensive. By the way, you will watch and you'll see over the next few years that fake news increasingly will be made illegal. Not just ridiculed and dismissed, but actually will be, there's legislation. In Malaysia, famously, earlier this year in 2018, they passed laws criminalizing fake news. And it won't stop there. It's going to happen in a lot of other places. Britain's already gone out of their mind relating to so-called fake news, and you can see this is going to get worse and worse. The point is this: that's the counterattack by the establishment against alternative media. All right. So, where that whole battle is going, that's a question. I don't know the answer to that, and maybe nobody does. But now, recently, relating to UFOs, we see something new. We see the New York Times on December 16, 2017, come out with two really interesting articles on UFOs. 2 articles in one day. Wow. Both of them gave a very, reasonably positive spin on the subject. One of them stated several revelations. The Pentagon, for 5 years, roughly speaking, spent about $22 million on UFOs, on UFO research. Now, in Pentagon money, that's really nothing, but still $22 million. Hey, significant. And you want to know, why would they be spending money at all if UFOs are supposed to be nonsense? B, they these articles put out the knowledge that this program, the Advanced Aerospace Identification Threat Program, ATIP, run by a man named Luis Elizondo, a career intelligence officer, Elizondo made statements that their program ran into objects that were unexplainable. That's interesting. Objects that he characterizes beyond next generation. That's also interesting. C, they discussed the encounter by Commander David Fravor of the U.S. Navy in his F-18A Super Hornet in November 2004 off the coast of California. Hell of a case. He's out there with another pilot on an intercept mission of an object that was being tracked. He sees it. He says it looked like a large tic-tac on or around the surface of the ocean, frothing waves below it. He goes down. It comes up. It zooms off at a speed that is off the charts. It's amazing stuff. The New York Times article also had another little bombshell, which was at Bigelow Aerospace, run by Robert Bigelow, is the private company that had the contract with the government to study all of this UFO data, and including receiving materials described in the New York Times piece as metal alloys that were being studied of these objects. Now, the New York Times article was a little cagey about that, and what they actually said was, according to Elizondo. Even so, Bigelow supposedly had this. So first of all, skeptics come in, and their first thing is to say, this doesn't mean a thing. First of all you've got is corrupt sweetheart deals that the Senate has with some aerospace guy, and they're throwing a few $1 million away. That's how some of them like to explain this away, but that really will not do. Unless you simply call Fravor and Elizondo bald-faced liars, which, okay, feel free to do that. I won't. And at the same time, they've come out with evidence in the form of video. Now, all of this is sponsored through Tom DeLonge's initiative, Tom DeLonge, former singer of Blink-182, to the Stars Academy. And people who've been following the UFO field, they kind of know about this. So DeLonge, in October of 2017, 2 months prior to the New York Times piece, had a press conference with Elizondo and a number of other individuals, very prominent, impressive people, to promote his initiative, which is a business model that, frankly, I have a hard time understanding how this is supposed to work. Entertainment, scientific R&D of exotic UFO tech, reverse engineering it, studying it, making money off of it, and so forth. The point is this. The New York Times piece did not just come out of the blue. The New York Times piece, in my view, is what I would characterize as damage control and basically cauterizing a wound. Because Elizondo's information about the ATIP program, that was going to come out no matter what. He was talking about it. It was coming out. End of story. And so if you're the New York Times, you are the voice of the establishment. You are the organization that's been in bed with CIA since the 1940s, since there was a CIA. New York Times has always been in bed with them. The New York Times gleefully promoted the lies of the Pentagon that led to the Iraq War in 2003, the fictitious weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times gleefully put out all the rumors of anthrax before there was an anthrax scare in the fall of 2001. The New York Times has been in bed with the national security state forever. They are never to be trusted. So the point is, the New York Times now gets out in front of this UFO story, and they put out a couple of reasonable articles about it. So why? Well, again, the best way to keep a secret is you pretend to share it. And so they gave out some information that was genuine information about the program. They also misleadingly said a number of other things. Really misleading. Misleading point number one. They stated that the Pentagon closed the program down in 2012. That's almost certainly not the case. Secondly, They use the phrase metal alloys to describe the materials received from these UFOs. Okay, let me take that first. There's a lot of good investigation going on now, not by establishment media, they're not doing a thing, but by private UFO researchers who are trying to get to the bottom of all of this. And one of the things that has come out is that that material is not metal alloys. And this is important because I read one debunking piece some time ago by an engineer who said metal alloys, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have mysterious metal alloys. We understand them all pretty well. Why would we need to have a detailed study of metal alloys? Well, it's probably a good point. But the fact is that what they're studying are not metal alloys. They're known as metamaterials. And whatever they are much more advanced than the kind of materials that we typically work with. That's the word that I have been getting from not one but two sources. So, what I would like to know is, how did the phrase metal alloy get its way into the New York Times piece? I asked if it was Elizondo, and I was told it wasn't him. If it wasn't he who stated that phrase metal alloys, then it was somehow between him and the journalists of that New York Times piece. It's Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kane, and Helene Cooper. Somehow it got into that article. And I would like to know how, because that's a piece of disinformation. I would have said misinformation, but it sounds like disinformation. Intentionally misleading information. So this was what I think was going on with the New York Times piece. You give some information, you withhold the rest, and you basically just kind of attempt to end the story there. Now, what it did, though, is by the very fact that the New York Times released this story, it essentially gave permission to the rest of the mainstream media for a little while to delve into this matter of UFOs. It was very interesting. We saw some pieces by the Washington Post a few days later, terrible pieces. The Washington Post is incapable of doing any good journalism in any way, really, but certainly on the matter of UFOs, they're reprehensibly bad. They tried to do a few pieces on UFOs. They were awful. But then some of the mainstream televised media, CNN and Fox and some of the others, did a few interesting interviews with some of these people, and it's quite interesting to watch. I think in particular the interview with Fravor by Tucker Carlson was quite good. Quite good. It's a 4 or 5 minute piece. It's on YouTube. So there was a little bit of a follow-up by the mainstream. But what you notice is that all of the really key questions have been avoided for the most part. All right. First of all, you don't have anyone in the mainstream asking one of the most fundamental questions of self-reflection. I mean, think about it. 70 years have gone by of nothing but debunking and dismissal of this subject of UFOs. And suddenly it comes out that, this is actually being taken seriously even in our own era. Wouldn't you think that anyone in the mainstream would say, wow, where have we been so snarky and dismissive and ridiculous about this all this time? What are the implications of that? And is there something serious going on? Is it credible that these objects, which are so extraordinary, merit only $22 million of spending over a 5-year period? Is that really credible to think? Or maybe there's something more going on here. I mean, one of the things that Elizondo said that I thought was quite on point in an early statement he gave for Politico was he said something like, if the Chinese or Russians were developing this technology, we would be really concerned here in the U.S. And instead, he said, all I get from here is the sound of crickets. So it's like from his higher-ups, no one seems to be concerned. Why? Why is this not a question that the media is really asking? If you've got objects that can do what the Tic Tac object did with Fravor, and let me really emphasize this. Fravor, by his description, circles around, sees it, comes down on an intercept, it comes up and zooms off And according to his statement, that thing was out of visibility in 2 seconds. There was a perfect visibility of 10 miles. And I think what he said, a more or less practical visibility of almost 50 miles. But even if you say 2 miles in 10 seconds, you're talking several thousands of miles per hour. More than 15,000 miles per hour, I believe. Really fast. Now, of course, that's an estimate by his, visual acuity and so forth, but still, that object was fast. And there's more, by the way. Again, this is where private researchers are doing the work that mainstream journalists, you'd think, should be doing, but are too lazy or too controlled to actually do. And one of the things that people are learning is that that tic-tac object had the ability to penetrate highly encrypted U.S. military codes. And how? Well, it was able to be at a certain specific location where the Navy pilots were vectored to be at, and it got there before they got there. It's as if it heard the communication, which was encrypted, and was right there at the rendezvous point. And let me just say, no one's supposed to be able to do that. And there are a number of technical details that I've learned a little bit about in terms of the nature of these communications and just how difficult that's supposed to be. And so that this object could just, with the greatest of ease, go through encrypted communications and be where it was supposed to be, that's serious. Where is the mainstream media? Asleep at the wheel, as they always are. So again, this to me offers very strong evidence that the mainstream media's efforts in analyzing this UFO phenomenon is not a serious effort. And it really never was. The only serious thing about it is, the only serious effort about it is that of damage control, that of containment of a problem that was threatening to go out of control. Now, there's one other thing that we might say about the media coverage of all of this. And, I've been talking about it as damage control, and I think that's true. But if you look at, say, the long-term issue of will there ever be a genuine disclosure of the UFO reality? And let me talk about this. So my opinion, I wrote a book about this 8 years ago, and my opinions evolve, let me just say, but I think I'm fairly consistently feeling there will never be a voluntary disclosure of this. Never voluntary. It will only happen if the powers that be are pushed to the wall, when they have no other way out. And I think that's still true. What's happening now is that in our society, we're in a very dynamic society, and there's a lot of people in this world who are interviewing other people, who are talking to everyone, and information's flowing around in ways that we were not able to do in previous generations. So stuff's coming out, and there's got to be contingency plans that have to be in place in the event that things are moving. And so I think that this might be a little drip of disclosure that we're seeing, which I think would probably be extended as long as possible. I think it is in the interest of those people who've got this information to maintain monopoly of that information for as long as possible, however long that will be. If that's 5 years, fine. If that's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever they can get out of it, however long they can milk it, they're going to milk it, because this is a moneymaker. Why? Just look at the guys into the stars right now. What are they actually doing? Well, they're shopping the video around. Three videos have been released, all right? The so-called Tic Tac video, the gimbal video, and the Go Fast video. As of this interview, those are the three that have been released. And there's a lot of technical discussion about all of them on some very astute websites, some of which are debunking them as, in one case, the gimbal video is the hot exhaust of a jet. It's not a bad argument. But what I have been learning is that the videos that are out are short versions of much longer videos. And the much longer version of these videos, and several others that have not yet been shown as of right now, that these, I am told, are very powerful. And I have been told this by individuals who've seen them. So that's all that I can say about it right now. And if that's the case, then it tells me that we, the public, are not the target audience of To the Stars Academy. They're not interested in convincing you or me about the reality of this phenomenon. So who are they interested in talking to? Well, I think they're interested in talking to Congress. Why? Because there's money there. There's research and development money there. If you want to gain contracts off of, with taxpayers' money to research your stuff, I mean, that's the most ideal situation in the world. Of course they're going to want that. And who does it go back toward? Well, it looks like it would go back to Robert Bigelow, seems to me. He's the one with all of the strings here. He's got knowledge, deep knowledge of this phenomenon. Make no mistake. He's one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on this subject. After all of the years that he's investigated it, he knows probably everything, practically speaking, that there is to know about this, I would bet. So he's in a great position to do very good scientific R&D on money-making opportunities connected to some of this technology. And I would assume that the conversations, the real conversations, the real people that they're seeking to impress are not you and me. It's members of Congress and other movers and shakers in Washington and elsewhere who have the ability to generate contracts for these guys so that they can start bringing in the money for defense contracts.